Good morning, it's 7 o'clock. You're watching The Only Breakfast Show live from Westminster. It doesn't look to have been a super Thursday at the polls for Sir Keir Starmer. The Conservatives are set to deliver another blow to the red wall of Labour Northern Heartlands, with the parliamentary seat of Hartlepool looking to go blue for the first time in almost 50 years. They've also made inroads as votes are counted in a handful of English councils. We'll speak to the Conservative Party co-chair Amanda Milling in a moment, and also have reaction from Labour and the Lib Dems. Also this morning, a pandemic portrait of our nation. At 9:30, we'll chat to a photographer and a curator from the National Portrait Gallery about the photo book, presenting a unique and personal record of the country from 2020. And spending 10 mindful minutes a day outside in the garden. We'll speak to former footballer and mental health advocate Wayne Bridge about his campaign to get more people outside enjoying the summer. That's at 9:45. It's Friday, the 7th of May. The Conservatives seem almost certain to turn Hartlepool blue as one shadow cabinet minister comes close to conceding the by-election.
But it's pretty clear that the numbers aren't going in our favour. To what extent, we just don't know yet. It's too early. But over the coming hours, providing we stay awake, we'll all find out.
That sounds like a yes.
Well, we'll soon find out, won't we?
Elsewhere, results from a handful of English councils appear to show a similar trend of Conservative gaining seats at Labour's expense. Also this morning, concerns over a possible version of the Indian COVID variant as the government prepares to release its travel green list for England. Calmer waters. Tensions ease in the Channel as talks continue to resolve the fishing dispute between Jersey and France. Rio raid. At least 25 people, including one policeman, are killed during a shootout in one of Brazil's biggest favelas.
And finally, it's becoming milder this weekend, but with that, we are seeing wet and windy conditions at times as well. I'll have the details for you later in the programme.
Good morning. Labour is on course to suffer a humiliating defeat in the Hartlepool by-election, heading towards losing a seat they've held since it was created nearly 50 years ago. After more than 8 hours, the votes are still being counted. But in the early hours, Labour's shadow Transport Secretary admitted to Sky News the party hasn't got over the line in the by-election. The result will be a disappointment to Sir Keir Starmer's leadership, who had said he was the person to restore Labour's fortunes. Let's take you straight across to John Craig now in Hartlepool for that result.
See, Gillian, the candidates have just been called up onto the stage. The result is imminent. The winner is going to be Jill Mortimer, the Conservative candidate. Question is, how big will her majority be? They're behind where those candidates are standing. There are a couple of tables which show just how big the majority is likely to be. Let's listen to the returning officer.
I, Denise McGuffin, being the acting returning officer for the election of a Member of Parliament for the Hartlepool constituency held on the 6th of May 2021, do hereby give notice that the number of votes recorded for each candidate at the said election is as follows. David Bentley, Social Democratic Party, 104 votes. Nicholas Charles Ellsworth Delves, commonly known as the Incredible Flying Brick, for the official Monster Raving Loony Party, 108 votes.
Thank you.
Hilton Dawson, the North East Party, 163 votes. Gemma Muncaster, commonly known as Gemma Evans, for the Women's Equality Party, 140 votes. Rachel Sarah Featherstone, the Green Party candidate, 358 votes. Adam Gaines, Independent, 126 votes. Andrew Michael Hagan, Liberal Democrats, 349 votes. Stephen Jack, commonly known as Steve Jack, Freedom Alliance, no lockdowns, no curfews, 72 votes. Christopher Killick, commonly known as Chris Killick, 248 votes. Samantha Jane Lee, commonly known as Sam Lee, Independent, 2,904 votes. Claire Martin for the Heritage Party, 468 votes. Gillian Wendy Mortimer, commonly known as Jill Mortimer, Conservative Party candidate, 15,529. John Prescott, Reform UK, 368 votes. Thelma Doris Walker, Independent, 250 votes. William Ralph Ward-Jackson, commonly known as W. Ralph Ward-Jackson, Independent, 157 votes. And Paul Daniel Williams for the Labour Party, 8,589 votes. The number of ballot papers rejected was as follows: 61 voting for more candidates than a voter was entitled to, and 121 being unmarked or wholly void for uncertainty. I do hereby declare that Gillian Wendy Mortimer, commonly known as Jill Mortimer, is duly elected. Congratulations, Jill.
So that's a majority of about 7,000 for Jill Mortimer. Here she is now, making her victory speech.
Well, thank you, Madam Returning Officer. Firstly, I want to thank the police and the council officers who have done an excellent job in ensuring that today's election and count went smoothly, especially given the difficult circumstances we've faced due to the coronavirus pandemic. I'd also like to thank all the candidates on the stage. It's been a tough contest, but it's one that's been fought with dignity and respect. So thank you all. I'm incredibly proud of the campaign my team and I have run in Hartlepool. It's based on local issues of real concern to the community here. And I would like to thank all of the people of this great town who've responded so positively to it. I'm also immensely proud to be the first Conservative MP in Hartlepool for 57 years. Not only that, I am the first woman ever to be elected as MP for this town. It's a truly historic result and a momentous day. Labour have taken people in Hartlepool for granted for too long. I heard this time and time again on the doorstep. People have had enough. And now, through this result, the people have spoken and they've made it clear it's time for change. People voted for that positive change, for jobs and investment, and it's exactly what I'm going to deliver. For now, I just want to say a few more thank yous. Directly to those people who voted for me, who put their faith in me, thank you from the bottom of my heart. I'm going to work tirelessly for Hartlepool and I will not let you down. I will not fail you. I'll work with both the Conservative government and the Teesside Valley Mayor, and I very much hope it will once again be Ben Houchen and we can celebrate with him again tomorrow. My thanks also go to CCHQ, everyone in my fantastic campaign team, and all those who supported me throughout this election, including my agent and very proudly my friend Diane Clark OBE, and of course the wonderful Hashon Cohan. And of course my heartfelt thanks go to all of my family. They know who they all are. They're more than just my blood relatives, for their unwavering support. And finally, election campaigns are only made possible by hard-working volunteers, people who are willing to sacrifice their time, pound the streets with us, as we've seen this time, baking sun, frozen letterboxes and hail. Political parties rely on the selflessness of these volunteers, and without them, our democracies and communities would be so much poorer. So thank you all once again. Thank you.
Do any of the candidates want to speak?
No.
It's been a really long evening, so I'm sure you, like me, want to thank everybody who's been working on the count this morning and through the evening. And we'll be back at 10 o'clock for those of you who want to be here. Good night, everyone.
OK, so that's the result in for Hartlepool. John Craig's still there for us. A significant defeat for Labour goes without saying, doesn't it, John?
It's a majority of just under 7,000. The Tories will be delighted by that. They haven't just scraped home here, they've won convincingly. Jill Mortimer's vote was 15,500 and something. I didn't hear the rest because of the loud cheers, but 15,500. And then Paul Williams for Labour, 8,580. My calculation, I think, is it's 6,940 or so. It's just under 7,000. So Labour have been not only defeated but really trounced here. So if you look at those numbers, 15,500 for the Conservatives, 8,500 for Labour. It's not actually that far off. The Tories have almost got twice as many votes as Labour. It's a 7,000 majority. None of the other candidates came anywhere. One of the independents was third. And the Greens, I noticed, just edged ahead of the Liberal Democrats. But the story of the morning is a thumping victory for the Conservatives by just under 7,000 in, as Jill Mortimer said, a seat that had been held by Labour for 57 years. She was also the first woman MP for the town. She said, Labour have taken people for granted for too long. People have had enough. The people have spoken. It's time for change, she said. So there we have it. We've been here since... we've been here more than 9 hours now since the polls closed at 10 o'clock. I think without any doubt it's the longest count I've certainly ever been to, and I've been to many. Obviously, because for various reasons, the COVID restrictions, the count was slower, fewer counters, and obviously there were 4 elections taking place. But the Conservatives will be delighted. Labour will be distraught at how badly they've done here. The Labour inquest begins. The Tory celebrations begin.
Indeed, John. Hope you can get some sleep soon. Well, joining me now is the co-chair of the Conservative Party, Amanda Milling. Good morning to you. As we heard there from John Craig, a thumping victory for the Conservatives. What do you put your success down to?
Well, I'm absolutely delighted by the result, and a huge credit and huge congratulations to Jill Mortimer and the team who've been working so hard, because that's what they've been doing. They've been working really, really hard over the last few weeks to make the case as to why people should vote Conservative. And in Jill's speech just then, she talked about change. Labour had taken this seat for granted, and by electing Jill, she'll be a fantastic, strong voice in Parliament for the people of Hartlepool, working with the government to deliver for them.
How much do you put it down to people actually actively voting for the Conservative candidate rather than voting against Labour because they've been dissatisfied with them?
So I think that we had a very strong message in terms of what we wanted to deliver. And actually looking around the area, I've been up there 6 times over the last few weeks, and you look at what Ben Houchin has delivered as the Tees Valley Mayor, what Conservative MPs who were elected in 2019 have also done. You know, they've hit the ground running and really made the kind of stood up for their constituents in Parliament. So very much about kind of taking a strong message in terms of the jobs and investments that still should be fighting for fighting crime, for apprenticeships and so much more.
There will be those who say that you've actually love-bombed the area with finance, the North East, with investment. Teesside won Freeport status and there have been measures to boost the green energy sector. Town deals were confirmed for Middlesbrough and Thornaby. Darlington won £5 million for a vaccine manufacturing project. 1.8 million announced for a cultural venue in Hartlepool. Is this what's really won people over?
I think people recognise that this area has not had a strong voice before, and what we've been doing, our representatives up there have been really making the case for that investment in that area. And so, and this is about them kind of representing their constituents, but also about how we're delivering on our levelling up agenda. In the 2019 general election, we talked about levelling up, and all of these these are all examples of how we're doing this on the ground.
In terms of the recent stories that have been concentrated around Boris Johnson as an individual, they have been quite negative. Accusations of sleaze, of corruption, much spoken about regarding the decorations of 10 Downing Street. Has this not played a factor in people's decisions when they're in the voting booth?
So I've been out on the campaign trail for many weeks now. In fact, I've covered over 5,000 miles, knocked on lots and lots of doors. And actually what the people who I've been talking to are talking about are the things that these elections are all about. It's about the local services. It's about keeping streets safe. It's about jobs and investment. And so it's very much, those have been the points that people have been discussing. But I was up in Hartlepool only on Monday with the Prime Minister, and the response that he received from the people of Hartlepool was just immense.
Why do you think that is? Many people pointing to the fact that this is sort of personality politics, and because he is popular, that is what he thrives on, that's what he trades on, and it's not actually to do with the politics that he's putting forward, that the party's putting forward. It's really about celebrity.
He's popular, but he's also delivered on those manifesto commitments that we made in 2019. Let's take Hartlepool as an example. They voted 69.5% to leave in the 2016 referendum. We made the promise, and the Prime Minister made the promise in the general election that we would get Brexit done. And that's very much what we did last year. And we've made a number of promises, and we're making inroads in terms of recruiting more police officers, recruiting more nurses, more money for the NHS and education. So they see that we are actually delivering on those policies that we promised back in 2019.
Do you think the sabre rattling with Jersey added to his popularity in the polls at this particular time?
I think that what happened in Jersey was about protecting those people in Jersey, and that was a policy decision for very good reasons.
Turning to the pandemic, which has been overarching all of our lives for the last year or so, what is happening with the uncertainty around travel? Are we going to find out which countries are going to be on the green list? Something we've been waiting for a long time. So
colleagues in government will be making announcements on that front shortly. You'll understand from my point of view, I've literally been out and about on the campaign trail and focusing on the elections.
But when you say shortly, do we have a date? Because you'll appreciate that the travel industry and also individuals who want to make a decision about whether they do in fact travel this summer, they need to know. Cost implications are apparent.
I know people are very keen to kind of get the certainty, and that will be provided very soon.
As in when?
As I say, government colleagues will be making an announcement in due course, but I understand why people are so keen to know more, because they do want to know whether they can get that sunshine break. Although I have to say, over the recent weeks, we've been benefiting from a bit of sunshine here in the UK.
Would you advise your constituents to travel?
It's totally up to constituents. I understand why that they might have concerns in terms of this, but it's important that we get it right. It's important that we ensure that people who do go on holiday can do safely.
Might we get an announcement today?
I'm not going to get drawn into when the announcement is going to be, but all I will say is that announcement will come forward so that people have got that certainty.
OK. Minister, thank you very much for speaking to us this morning. Your smile is still there. A very happy morning for you indeed. Still to come on the show at 7:45. We'll hear from the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Daisy Cooper. And from 8:05, the Shadow Communities and Local Government Secretary, Steve Reid, will be in the studio representing Labour. Well, let's take you to the newsroom now and our election analyst, Michael Thrasher, who can bring us all the latest results and analysis, of course, as well as his own projections. You're doing well. You've been up for a very, very, very long time, much longer than normal, because this is in a situation like no other. COVID held up the count, and therefore everything is a little later. How are we looking now across the board?
Well, it was worth waiting for, wasn't it? we're used to seeing big swings in by-elections, and this one is a big swing, 16% swing. But what we're not used to seeing is a swing from the opposition to the governing party. This is the largest percentage point increase for a governing party at a by-election since the war. So it's quite a spectacular turnaround in a seat that Labour should really have safely defended. The Conservatives have taken it, and it only becomes the 5th by-election since the war that a governing party is taken from the opposition. So it's really quite remarkable, and it follows on from a set of local election results that also promise to be remarkable too. And none of this is good news for the Labour Party.
Michael, is it that the Conservatives have done everything correctly, or is it that Labour has failed?
Well, I think you'd have to say a little bit of each. I think the Conservatives have clearly taken a lot of the vote that used to go to Eurosceptics, UKIP, but they've also managed to, as they did in the last general election in December 2019, what they've also done is again persuaded former Labour voters to again support them in the local elections. So the December 2019 result wasn't a flash in the pan. It appears that the Conservatives have made serious inroads into traditional Labour support, so much so that they've gained a seat which Labour have held for many, many years.
Michael, thank you very much. Not sure if you can go to bed just yet, but we might see you a little later on. Thank you. Well, in other news, the major protest over fishing rights at Jersey's main port ended last night as French fishermen and 2 Royal Navy ships returned home. Jersey's government held what it's described as positive and constructive talks with the fishermen, who had been furious at demands they obtain new licences to carry on operating in Jersey's waters after Brexit. Let's get the latest now from our correspondent, Ashna Hurinag, who's in Jersey for us. Good morning, Ashna. And is it completely over now? I thought that some ships were remaining just to keep an eye on things over the weekend.
It definitely isn't over, that's for sure. I think that's the short answer, if you like. But there is definitely that strong sense of feeling here at the port, not only from fishermen, but from fish merchants we've spoken to as well this morning, who say that Jersey feels as though it is the joke of the world this morning. They are waking up here after the theatrics of yesterday, which saw some 60 or 70 French fishing vessels pull into the port behind me. As for the politicians here on the island, they tried to manage this with diplomacy, many of them taking to the water yesterday, talking to the French fishermen about what they wanted. The French are furious over this documentation, this new procedure that they say is putting their livelihoods at risk. But as for the Jersey fishermen, they too are angry. This is very much a battle between the two. As for Jersey and France and the UK, they have been sharing the waters behind me for decades. There is huge history here, but they knew that come the Brexit deal, come the Brexit agreement being signed, there was bound to be teething problems, but no one could have foreseen the confrontation that happened yesterday. It has to be said it was largely peaceful, but now the battle very much on the decision makers' shoulders to find out exactly how it's going to impact the people here in Jersey. But certainly from these guys' perspective, they're not willing to back down.
And there are many that say that, you know, they can see both sides of the argument, but the emphasis now has to be on the future relationship, because the technicalities in terms of licences has changed, so they have to move forward and work with the new rules.
Yeah, that's right. The Jersey politicians, from their perspective, and from the UK government, we heard from George Eustice yesterday, saying that things have changed now and we need to move with the times. But the problem is that you've got a huge, vast area of France that many of the Jersey fishermen aren't able to go in, and their argument is, well, if we can't go into your waters, if you're not granting us the licences, we're not kicking up a fuss. What about, why do you want it that you want to come in here too and use our waters? And also, it's not a case of blocking off the Jersey waters, the Jersey shores. It's more a case of them having to apply for licences, but applying for them in a very different way. So using, proving, for example, that they've got records dating back to, say, 2016 16 and maybe even further afield. The latest that we've heard is that from the French side of things, there are suggestions this morning that there could be the port of Calais that might be their next target, if you will. On the Jersey side, they say that if the government here, if the politicians here back down, they may well stage their own protest.
Ashton, thank you. Public health experts are recommended that a version of the Indian COVID-19 variant be listed as a variant of concern by the government. It comes as various clusters of the B16172 variant have been discovered across England. Well, our correspondent Enda Brady joins me now. Enda, a worrying development for sure, but just how worried should we be?
So there's no indication that these variants, which were first detected in India, can evade the vaccines. That's the positive news this morning. We're likely to hear more from Public Health England in the coming hours about what's happening here. In total, there are reports of 48 clusters of this variant across the country. Cases have been found now in the northwest of England, in London and in the East Midlands, all of which are linked to travel. Now, of those 193 confirmed cases, we're hearing reports as well, 7 have been confirmed in Northern Ireland. But as I say, no sign yet that this Indian variant can evade the vaccination programme. So we may hear more from Public Health England later today. And of course, this coming on the day when the government is set to outline the green list of travel countries where people will be able to perhaps go away after May the 17th, when international travel opens back up again. And the factors that they've been looking at and studying to get these countries onto that green list, you need rates of infection to be low, a high percentage of the population who have already been fully vaccinated against COVID-19, and also keeping an eye on those emerging new variants. Reports this morning that there will only be 10 countries making that green list later today. OK, and for the moment, thank you so much. Well, let's give you a result just in, the latest that we have from Doncaster. We'll just bring that up for you. And we can see that it's a Labour hold. Vote there, 31,232 to the Conservative candidate, James Hart, 21,019. Turnout, 27.7% there. So Labour hold in Doncaster. Let's take a look at the weather for you now with Naz.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Good morning. Still a fairly cool and showery day for today, but it's one more day of that before it becomes milder this weekend, but also turning rather wet and windy courtesy of this low pressure system bringing through some heavy rain and strong winds. This morning, a chilly start, quite frosty. Some showers around northern and western areas, and they'll become more widespread through the day around central and northern parts of the UK, then later becoming confined to northern and eastern areas, in between dry and brighter spells. But some of them, like previous days, could be heavy and thundery and maybe wintry across the high ground of the north. But for much of Ireland, Wales, most of the Midlands and central and southern and eastern England, it will be a mainly dry afternoon and feeling fairly mild, temperatures slightly higher than recently. But tonight, wet and windy tomorrow as well.
The Conservatives have made history in Hartlepool this morning, winning the by-election by a majority of 6,940. It's the first time ever the Conservatives have taken this seat from Labour, delivering another blow to the party's red wall of Northern Heartlands. Well, this was the moment the count was announced.
Gillian Wendy Mortimer, commonly known as Jill Mortimer, Conservative Party candidate, 15,529.
Conservative Jill Mortimer won the seat with more than half of the votes cast and a swing from Labour of almost 16%. She described it as an historic day.
I'm incredibly proud of the campaign my team and I have run in Hartlepool. It's based on local issues of real concern to the community here. And I would like to thank all of the people of this great town who've responded so positively to it. I'm also immensely proud to be the first Conservative MP in Hartlepool for 57 years. Not only that, I am the first woman ever to be elected as MP for this town. It's a truly historic result and a momentous day.
Well, earlier I spoke to the Conservative Party co-chair, Amanda Milling, who explained why she believed the Tories won this seat.
They've been working really, really hard over the last few weeks to make the case as to why people should vote Conservative. And in Jill's speech just then, she talked about change. Labour had taken this seat for granted. And by electing Jill, she'll be a fantastic, strong voice in Parliament for the people of Hartlepool, working with the government to deliver for them.
Well, let's take you across to Jane Secker now in the Sky News Centre, who can dive into the data of the local elections a little bit more for us. We're expecting Jane to take us through now. There she is. Morning.
Hi, Gillian. Yeah, well, as we just said, we've got the by-elections, we've got the Hartlepool by-elections, we've also got local mayoral elections, lots of other elections. But a really big thing that's also happened over the last 24 hours are the local council elections. Now, this is a really big year for local councils because as well as the 2021 council elections, there's also the last year's council elections, the 2020 ones, which were deferred because of COVID. So let's see if we can bring those up here on the screen and see what results we have so far. Now, obviously, a sea of white. We have got lots and lots and lots of results still to come through, but there are some that have come through already. We can see that Labour have held a lot of the northern seats, Sunderland, South Tyneside, Newcastle, Gateshead. Perhaps no surprise that they've held those seats, but we're going to take a look at how strongly they've held them in a short while. But good night for the Conservatives so far. Harlow, they've taken down there in Essex, Nuneaton and Bedworth, and Redditch, both of those up in the Midlands. Now, those are significant because Harlow, they took 7 out of the 8 Labour seats that were up on that council. Conservatives last controlled it in 2011. And Nuneaton, up there in the Midlands, they took 10 out of the 11 seats that the Labour were trying to contest there. The Conservatives last had control of that council back in 2019. So let's see how this translates into actual seats. These are the seats. Labour, 108, down 38. The Conservatives, 84, up 40. The Lib Dems held a couple, up 2 with 30, and the Greens up 3. This is how those seats then translate into councils. Labour have 5, down 1. The Conservatives have 4, up 2, and other 3, which is down 1. But let's look at these in a little bit more detail. And this really shows us, yes, Labour have taken 1 seat, lost a few. Conservatives have certainly gained, but it shows you just how much that the Labour losses are big losses. They've lost 39 seats, and the Conservative gains are big gains. If we quickly look at the councils, this shows us where the councils are now. Conservatives have 4, Labour 5, Conservatives gaining 2, and Labour losing 1. Early days, lots and lots more councils still to declare, but the early signs are showing it's been a good night for the Conservatives so far.
Jane, thank you. Back to you a little later on. Well, let's get more now on the local election results as Hartlepool has turned blue for the first time in almost 50 years. Joining me now is former Conservative MP Justin Greening and the former Labour MP Caroline Flint. Good morning to you both. To you, first of all, Caroline Flint. Very unusual for a governing party to win a by-election. What do you think Labour got so drastically wrong?
Well, we've had a poor night so far in the North East and the catastrophic loss of Hartlepool, but also in the Midlands as well. I think in the post-mortem, Labour has to ask itself some really hard questions. Was the Labour candidate, the right choice, an ardent Remainer for Hartlepool in this by-election? Was the date of the by-election the right choice, given we had the Tees Valley election on as well? But I think, too, it's really important to understand as well that in the last 6 weeks, Labour has been obsessed with curtains in Downing Street and Dyson and ventilators, and that was not cutting through to the public. And that was clear from the telephone canvassing, and it was clear on the doorstep. There are real lessons to learn, and part of it is, how does Labour reconnect with working class communities in the North and in the Midlands in a way that they accept that they let them down, Labour let them down in 2019, not the reverse?
Just picking up on that point that you mentioned, that perhaps the wrong candidate was chosen. Justine Greening, that was also the accusation against Jill Mortimer, that she wasn't a local. But in the event, it didn't seem to matter.
Yeah, I think Brexit broke the mould. It broke down those tribal loyalties. But the defining issue in this election, and I think for this country now on, is levelling up. And the difference between the two candidates and I think the two parties is that the Conservatives had a plan on levelling up that was credible and was about that local community, and Labour didn't. And I think there's a lot of Labour activists, there's a lot of Labour MPs who understand what levelling up is, why it matters so much. I just don't think the Labour leadership have got it. And until they're willing to accept that they need to compete on a better levelling up vision for the country and for the communities they want to win in again, I think Labour will continue its downward slide.
Caroline, would you agree with that they haven't got the message, Labour hasn't got the message clear enough on levelling up in these areas?
Well, levelling up is really important. I mean, I think we have to at some point define what levelling up actually means. I don't think a lot of people in Hartlepool and elsewhere in the country in these local elections quite understand what that means. But what is true is Labour has to be a party that speaks about hope for the future. And part of that hope for the future is a better sharing of the resources of our country across a wider community. It has to decide, and Keir Starmer has to decide, is Labour only going to be viewed as the voice of liberal-minded city and university towns, or is it actually going to be a voice for those working class communities in some of our smaller places like Hartlepool, like Doncaster, like Redditch, like Nuneaton? And that's the real issue. And then on top of that, you get to how do we grow our economy in order to be able to provide the sort of futures that people can want for themselves and their kids and their grandkids. And there's a really important way in which Labour can do that. But part of the reconnection is not to just say we've listened, we've changed. You really have to engage with people that we let them down. We let those working class voters down in 2019, both in terms of the leader, Jeremy Corbyn, but also in terms of Brexit. And we need to move on from that. But there needs to be a level of contrition by Labour when they approach these voters and say, we're listening.
Justine Greening, from what Caroline Flint's saying there, it seems that it was, well, we know it definitely technically was Labour's to lose, but it's because of what they haven't done correctly why there has been a Conservative success, rather than anything the Conservatives have done to bring about this result. If that is the case, it's not sustainable, is it?
See, I think voters do understand what levelling up's about. They do get that it is about people having the same chances to get on in life wherever they are. And as Caroline says, whether they're in the city, whether they're in a town, whether they're growing up in a rural area, I think voters do get it. And I think they are wanting to see which party has the best plan on levelling up, and the parties with the best plan on levelling up win elections. I think it is actually that simple. Levelling up is the big alignment that's happening in the country. It's less about left and right now. And I think whilst the Labour Party continue to obsess on where they are on the left-right spectrum and Brexit, then I think they won't move on to this core issue that actually is the one that does bring people together, which is having the same opportunities. The Conservatives were talking about how to bring investment, both from the public sector, the private sector, how to create jobs and opportunities for people in Hartlepool. That's what everybody wants wherever they live. And that's why the Conservatives are doing well and winning by-elections in places like Hartlepool, really, for the first time. I have to also say it is fantastic to see another woman MP in Parliament. Long overdue, probably in Hartlepool, and it's brilliant that voters have voted for Jill Mortimer. Congratulations to her.
Yeah, she did say herself that the first female MP in that area. You mentioned about what people are pulling together over, and one of the things that we've all had to pull together over is the pandemic. And Caroline Flint, it has to be said the vaccination programme has been a huge success, that attributed to Boris Johnson. Would you say that has been the reason for the Boris Johnson bounce, as it's been described?
It's certainly the case, and we've known this even before the vaccination programme. I'm a vaccination centre volunteer myself, so I meet people all the time who are delighted to be getting their vaccines. But I think it's also about, in the pandemic, what we've heard over the last year is people saying, look, mistakes have been made, but to a certain extent, whoever was in government might have made those mistakes. And as we've come through this year, I'm sure there's lots of things the public don't think the government's done well, but overall, they're glad to have got through it, and they're glad they're getting the vaccines. And I think, again, this was one of the reasons why it was so important. Keir Starmer actually did make some really important strategic choices. He did choose to not just oppose the government on everything they were doing on the pandemic, and that was the right choice. And people want to know that there is that sort of sense of the country pulling together. And yeah, the vaccine bounce is there, but I think importantly, it's recognising this, that in somewhere like Hartlepool, it only didn't become a Tory seat in 2019 because of the Brexit vote that was there. As soon as that Brexit vote has disappeared, it didn't come back to Labour, as some in Labour just thought it might do. It actually went to the Tories. And if it had been the case that Brexit wasn't standing in more Labour seats in 2019, we would have lost Yvette Cooper, we'd have lost Ed Miliband and many other seats to the Tories. And so, as I say, in this post-mortem, Labour, Keir Starmer has to really seriously ask some hard questions of itself and understand this is not about pleasing the membership of the Labour Party. It's reaching out to those communities that actually are about why Labour exists, those working class communities that founded the Labour Party.
Yeah, it'd be very interesting to sit in on those post-election discussions with the shadow cabinet. Caroline Flint and Justine Greening, thank you very much for sharing your views with us this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Still to come on Sky News Breakfast, we'll be getting the latest reaction from the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Democrats as the Conservatives gain Hartlepool from Labour.
This is a forgotten front line. They are dying here.
Here it comes. Cut.
Boy, have we got some interesting ways of showing you what's going on.
Their message to us, get ready.
Nothing like apocalypse.
Instructing you to stay at home.
I can't believe we did that.
It's pretty special, isn't it?
We should protect our heritage. Unfortunately, it will become part of Azerbaijan.
This monastery is under the protection, for now, the next 5 years at least, of Russian peacekeepers. I'm Diana Magny and I'm Sky's Russia correspondent, based here in Moscow. I witnessed the despair of the Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh who were digging up the soil of their dead relatives. It's Armenians who've abandoned these villages now. Quite what their strategy is, I'm not sure, but they have made some arrests already today.
They can't kill everyone, they can't shoot everyone, they can't arrest everybody.
We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world. I mean, this clearly says, I love Hitler. Are you saying that doesn't say Hitler? Russia insists that its military build-up in the Arctic is purely defensive.
Did you know symptoms of hay fever can develop at any stage of life, not just in childhood? The Pollen Reports, sponsored by Philips Connected Air Purifiers.
Most of Ireland, Wales, the Midlands and central and southern England will be mainly dry and bright this afternoon. Elsewhere, we'll see showers, some of them locally heavy with the risk of hail and thunder, especially in the north and east. It'll still be cool for the time of year, but temperatures will be slightly higher than recently. Pollen levels will be generally moderate today, with tree pollen such as birch, oak and ash airborne during the fine and sunny weather. High levels are likely in the southeast. Plain pollen is likely in some cities too, and spores will increase temporarily after any showers.
The Pollen Reports, sponsored by Philips Connected Air Purifiers.
Well, back to our continuing coverage of the local elections. The Deputy Leader of the Liberal Democrats joins me now to discuss the Conservatives' win in Hartlepool and what this will mean for the future of the country. Good morning to you. Good to speak to you. First of all, tell us what you make of the result in Hartlepool and what this means for the wider political landscape.
Well, it's very clearly a good result for the Conservative Party. Nobody can deny that. But I think that there are probably a number of factors at play here. The first is that the Conservatives have clearly won the Brexit vote. The second, of course, is that there were some local factors affecting the previous Labour MP who had to stand down. And thirdly, there is no doubt that there has been this vaccine bounce. But I think longer term, what we'll see is that the public will want to judge the Conservative government not only on their broader handling of the pandemic, but also how they handle the recovery as we look to the future and people and furlough ends and people face the prospect of unemployment and rising cost of food.
And what does it specifically tell us about Labour in that area?
Well, I think Labour themselves have said this morning that they need to listen, reconnect, and what we've seen from results not just in Hartlepool but across the North East is that Labour are actually losing seats to lots of different parties. I'm very pleased to see that Liberal Democrats have held their ground in Gateshead and Newcastle, and of course we've made 4 gains in Sunderland as well. So I think Labour clearly has big issues to work out. But as I say, it's not just that they're losing, they've not just lost Hartlepool to the Conservatives, but they're losing local seats to lots of different parties as well.
And what's your relevance in all of this? I mean, we are very much seeing that it's a two-party system. That's what it looks like in operation. Do you think the Liberal Democrats are still relevant?
Yes, absolutely. And that's why we've seen gains in areas such as Sunderland, and that's why we've managed to hold our ground in Newcastle and Gateshead as well. The fact is that with Hartlepool, it's a by-election, and by-elections are pretty much always framed as a fight between two particular parties. Hartlepool was no different. It was framed as a fight between the Conservatives and Labour, and that meant that other smaller parties were not going to get a look in. So I'm really pleased that we are making gains in other areas of the North East, and long may that continue.
You say that it was framed as a two-party race in Hartlepool, but nationally, that's really how politics is framed. Do you think that people believe that there is any point to voting Liberal Democrat?
Yes, I think so. The fact is that there are large parts of the country where only the Liberal Democrats can beat the Conservatives. We have been very outspoken in the last few months about various Liberal issues. We have been leading the charge for the right to protest. We have been leading the charge against the government holding powers that it doesn't need during some of its emergency coronavirus legislation. So we've been very outspoken this year on a number of issues. And I think people not only see that we're the only party standing up for Liberal values, but we are also the only party that can beat the Conservatives in large parts of the country.
These have been Ed Davey's first elections, and it's apparent that the party has moved away from its Brexit line. People may be thinking that you don't hold your course and you change with the wind.
No, that's not right. I mean, we have always been pro-Europeans. It's in our blood as Liberals. We're pro-Europeans, we're pro-internationalists, and we've never shied away from that. But we're also community activists, and our community values are part of our philosophy and part of our ideology as a party. And that's why at local elections, we pride ourselves on having candidates who are part of their communities. And we'll see over the course of the next 48 hours what the results are like for the Liberal Democrats as results start to come in over Saturday and Sunday in local councils across England.
You are a party of opposition. You've tried to throw a couple of punches on the Prime Minister as regards sleaze and corruption, but nothing seems to have stuck. Do you regret taking that line of attack?
No, not at all. I think for the moment, a lot of people are maybe reserving judgment to see what the findings are of various investigations. But we have to remember that the allegations are serious enough, that the Electoral Commission has announced an investigation, that there are a number of parliamentary inquiries into all sorts of accusations to do with cash for contracts. There is ongoing legal cases demanding transparency from the government that they've so far refused to give. And it's absolutely right and proper that all these investigations run their course. And once
the Prime Minister and the Conservative Party, that they've said that it was simply tittle-tattle and the voters didn't care about it. I mean, they've been proved right, haven't they?
Well, this is one by-election and it's a snapshot. And as I say, there are lots of different factors at play in Hartlepool. But the fact is, as I say, these accusations have only been made in the last sort of 10 days or so. And there are a number of investigations that will have to run their course. And at the end, when more information is available, the public will be able to make their judgment then.
Daisy Cooper, Lib Dem Deputy Leader, thank you very much for speaking to us this morning.
Thank you.
Let's take a look at the weather for you now.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Good morning. One more day of the cool and showery weather, but then into the weekend. Yes, it turns milder, but watch out for this, because that's going to bring wet and windy conditions, particularly through Saturday. Until then, it's a fine start out there this morning. Most places dry and sunny. Chilly, yes, and a bit frosty in some spots. And there are a few showers scattered around northern and western areas. Some of them are turning wintry across the high ground of the north. And then as we get into this afternoon, the showers will become more widespread for many central and northern parts of the UK in between sunny spells. Like previous days, some of them could get heavy and thundery, particularly as they become confined towards northern and eastern areas of Scotland and England into this afternoon, with the risk of hail and maybe some thundery downpours. But elsewhere, particularly across Ireland, Wales, most of England, there will be lots of dry weather and some sunshine, and slightly milder than recently. But the southwest becomes cloudy and windy by the end of the day, with heavy rain and strong winds spreading northeastwards.